Loving versus Virginia. This court case focuses on a young couple fighting for their right to marry. Alright. Mildred Jeter was a Black and Native American woman born in June of 1939. Richard Loving was a white man of English and Irish descent born in October of 1933. Mildred was only 11 years old when she met Richard Loving at a musical performance put on by her siblings in her childhood home. Upon meeting, a friendship began, even though initially Mildred wasn't really feeling him and thought he was kind of an ass. But anyways, roughly 6 or so years after they met, Mildred and Richard started their own little fairy tale, but in Caroline County, Virginia. It was like any other love story, except for one thing. During this time, in 1958, Virginia had strict anti-miscegenation laws in place. For those who don't know, anti-miscegenation is not just a hard word to pronounce. It's a set of laws that enforce racial segregation at the level of marriage and intimate relationships by criminalizing interracial marriage and sometimes also sex between members of different races. Richard and Mildred decided that these Virginian anti-miscegenation laws were not going to stop them from being together. So they packed their bags and went to visit family in Washington, D.C., one of the few states that allowed interracial marriages at the time. While in D.C., they got married and later decided to return to their home in Caroline County, Virginia. About 5 weeks into their marriage, on the night of July 11th, 1958, the Lovings were brutally awakened in their home by police officers. That night, at about 2 a.m., police officers barged into their home, woke the couple up, and handcuffed them. They were taken into custody and charged with unlawful cohabitation and arrested on the spot. They were sentenced to a year in prison each, but later on, the court suspended their imprisonment under one condition: that they leave Virginia immediately and not return for a minimum of 25 years. With what seemed like no other choice, the Lovings packed their bags and moved to Washington, D.C., to stay with family once again. But who could be satisfied leaving their house behind and their whole life just to move away and live with extended family by force? They decided they would not let racial laws determine their future and their marriage. So the Lovings reached out to Richard Kennedy, the U.S. District Attorney at the time, to discuss what options they may have to fight for their marriage. Kennedy referred them to the American Civil Liberties Union, also known as the ACLU. The ACLU is an organization whose stated mission is to defend and preserve the individual rights and liberties guaranteed to every person in this country by the Constitution and the laws of the United States. They call themselves the nation's guardians of liberty. Anyways, they agreed to take the Lovings case, and that is where the Lovings case begins. In the April of 1963, the Lovings case reached the Supreme Court. The Lovings argued that the state's anti-miscegenation laws were a direct violation of their 14th Amendment, specifically the Equal Protections Clause and the Due Process Clause. The 14th Amendment states that no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. The defendants, on the other hand, claim that nowhere were these laws violating the 14th Amendment. There was no violation because the anti-miscegenation laws in place included everyone of every race. They argued that the laws did not violate the Equal Protections Clause, because if a couple was charged with living in cohabitation, such as the Lovings, they would equally be punished. The Lovings each got 1 year of prison, and to that, it was equal. The law did not favor anyone in this case. Both parties were criminals. The court did not agree with this, however. Excuse my language, but they essentially called complete bullshit on this entire argument. In a unanimous vote, the court upheld that anti-miscegenation laws were in fact unconstitutional. Mr. Chief Justice Warren delivered the opinion of the court. He stated that these laws' legitimate purpose was to preserve the racial integrity of its citizens and to prevent the corruption of blood, the mongrel breed of citizens, and the obliteration of racial pride, obviously being an endorsement of the doctrine of white supremacy. Furthermore, the court argued that although the regulation of marriage is state-mandated, that does not mean their laws can violate constitutional rights of the citizens, as determined in Skinner v. Oklahoma and Mayer v. Nebraska. State laws do not live outside of the Constitution. The court believes that the 14th Amendment served the purpose of ensuring that no statutes constitute invidious racial discrimination in the states. Additionally, the court ruled that these anti-miscegenation laws were in fact a violation of the Due Process Clause. These laws deprive the Lovings of liberty without due process of law. The freedom to marry has always been recognized as a personal right essential to the pursuit of happiness. To deny these fundamental freedoms solely on the basis of racial discrimination directly violated the rights of the citizens. To once again quote Chief Justice Warren, "Under our Constitution, the freedom to marry or not to marry a person of another race resides within the individual and cannot be infringed by the state." That is why the court unanimously sided with the Lovings and demanded their convictions be reversed immediately. Unfortunately, a few years after this monumental court case, Richard Loving passed away and Mildred Loving went blind after being in a car accident. Though they did not get the happily ever after they truly deserved, their fight in the courthouse created long-lasting effects in America. Following Loving v. Virginia, 14 states, some of which included Virginia, Alabama, and Texas, had their anti-miscegenation laws banned. This effect would continue until anti-miscegenation laws were gone in all 50 states. Loving v. Virginia has also been used in many cases as precedent. Its court decision has been referenced in over 900 cases, the most famous one in our time being Obergefell v. Hodges, the Supreme Court case that outlawed the ban on same-sex marriage. Citing Loving v. Virginia helped court cases argue that, over the decades, the Supreme Court has demonstrated that the right to marry is an expansive liberty interest that may stretch to accommodate changing societal norms. Through Loving v. Virginia, so many individuals have won the right to marry who they want and has helped them live in peace, unafraid of living against the law.